Good morning, everyone. We're about to get started. April is National Sexual Awareness Month. I am very happy to be here in the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. to welcome you to our event, our symposium, which is entitled Call to Action Addressing Sexual Violence on Campus. And my name is Frances Ash Goins. I'm Deputy Director for the Office on Women's Health. This event is being webcast, so all of you people there outlined in webcast land, good morning and welcome. We're also going to be tweeting this event through various people throughout the department, and we're thrilled about that. I would like to open the morning's event with the singing of our national anthem by Mary Brown from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Would everyone stand, please? Thank you so much, Mary. What a rounding rendition of that song. It's beautiful. We are so glad that the Department of Health and Human Services, in collaboration with the Department of Justice and in collaboration with the Office of the Vice President at the White House, are presenting this program to you today. I would like to bring my boss, Dr. Howard Koh, with welcoming remarks.
Thank you. I'm still getting over the Star-Spangled Banner. That was great. Well, Fran, thank you so much for your warm introduction, and welcome everyone to this very important public health morning. We're just thrilled to see all of you who have gathered to express a commitment to addressing sexual violence on campus and responding to this call to action. We understand that this issue is an increasingly prevalent one, not only for our institutions of higher learning, but indeed for our families across this country. And that's why this call to action is so important today. It's critical to bring together people from throughout government and throughout the country to address this issue. And we're very proud of our long-standing collaborations with many of you, with the White House Office of the Vice President. It's great to see Lynn Rosenthal here and her leadership in action again, the Justice Department, and our wonderful HHS Steering Committee on Violence Against Women with leaders from our Office of Women's Health, particularly Frances Ash Goins and colleagues, and from our Administration and Children and Families, Family and Youth Services, Bureau of Family Violence Prevention and Services. We're here today because we know that sexual violence, defined as sexual activity where consent is not obtained or freely given, is unacceptable. But disturbingly, as we will hear from the CDC and my good friend Dr. Howard Spivak, the 2010 National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey notes that some 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking, and that equates to more than 12 million women and men. And so this is a tremendous public health challenge for our campuses and our country. In fact, it's been estimated that up to a quarter of college women in the U.S. have experienced an attempted or completed rape during their college career, a horrifying statistic. And tragically, we know that alcohol is a catalyst and a driving force for much of this violence. In fact, one study showed that as many as 74% of rape perpetrators in a sample of college students had been drinking alcohol at the time of attack. Fortunately, we have all of you here to express your commitment and leadership. And at HHS, I am very proud as the Assistant Secretary to note several examples of work that have already started in this department to address this issue. Within my own office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, I want to thank Sarah Wattenberg, our policy advisor on behavioral health, who has helped forge a department-wide collaboration, a learning collaborative with college presidents led by my friend Dr. Jim Kim, the president of Dartmouth College and now newly nominated by the president to be president of the World Bank. He approached us several years ago and said that we should do more together as partners addressing this issue, and there has been very strong work ongoing at Dartmouth, at college campuses, and around the country in collaboration with a college presidents working group led by our National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, or NIAAA. NIAAA is also studying the relationship between alcohol use and violence in adolescents and college-age students. And so we're very proud of these efforts at NIAAA and NIH. In Fran's office, the Office on Women's Health, we have a health and wellness initiative for women attending minority institutions, and this is a project that's training men and women, students of all ages, faculty, staff, campus security, and police about critical issues associated with violence against women on campus. And then in our Office of Adolescent Health, led by Evelyn Kapler, we have a pregnancy assistance fund authorized by the Affordable Care Act that's making some $25 million in grants available to grantees who support services at institutions of higher education, including services for pregnant women who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And then last but not least, our Administration on Children, Youth, and Families have many initiatives in this regard, training for community groups, including college campuses, a National Health Resource Center, and also a very important National Domestic Violence Hotline, which answers approximately 17,000 calls each month, of which some 15% are from youth age 18 to 24. So these are just some of the examples of how our department have responded to this crisis, but we are very appreciative of the commitment and work of everyone here throughout government and throughout this society. We are very grateful to the members of the public who are watching by webcast. It is very important to have this call for action and this critical day, and we want to welcome you to HHS and thank you for all you're doing for this critical public health issue. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Coe. Our next welcoming speaker is Lynn Rosenthal, White House Advisor on Violence Against Women. She is the first ever White House Advisor on Violence Against Women. She works with Vice President Biden and the White House Council on Women and Girls to coordinate efforts across federal agencies to address domestic violence and sexual assault. Lynn Rosenthal.
Thank you so much, Frances, and good morning. Welcome to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Coe. Your leadership in this area has been tremendous and is much appreciated. I want to thank Frances and her team at the Office of Women's Health and our new acting director, Nancy Lee, for all of their incredible leadership. I think some of you have heard me say before that I first met Frances in the East Room at the White House during the Clinton administration. I was in the advocacy world. She was already working hard within the federal government, and we happened to sit next to each other at an event that then First Lady Hillary Clinton held on women's health. So it's been a pleasure to sit next to Frances again in the East Room in the Obama administration. I want to acknowledge Angela Rose and all of the hard work of PAVE in your leadership in making sexual violence unacceptable. I know that we will do it, Angela. Most of all, I want to thank all of you, those who came today and those who are listening at your desk, for the commitment that you have made to assisting victims and most of all to ultimately preventing sexual violence. This is part of an administration-wide, a whole government approach to reducing sexual violence. We know that more than 18 million women in this country have been raped. 18 million women in this country have been raped, and that the long-term consequences of sexual violence, physically and emotionally, are profound. And I believe that we are the first administration under the leadership of President Obama and Vice President Biden to take this on and say that we are going to make a difference. And I had actually intended to come here this morning and tell you about all the great things that we are doing across the administration. But instead, I was at my desk late last night because I was remembering a situation that happened in 1988 that profoundly influenced my work in this area. And so I went online to remind myself of the details of that case, and then spent the next 3 hours literally online reading not only about that story, but many, many, many more. And so that's where I want to start with today. The year was 1988. This young woman was 18 years old. She was a freshman at college in the town where I lived at the time. She was sort of a shy young woman, average. She would have described herself as average. She was invited to a fraternity party, and she was excited about it and also nervous. And so she had a little too much to drink, and Dr. Coe pointed to this connection before she left to go to the party, and then again at the party where she was fed alcohol by the members of the fraternity. She eventually passed out. She was unconscious, gang raped by 4 men who then scrawled obscenities all over her naked body and dumped her naked at 3 o'clock in the morning on the steps of a neighboring fraternity house. She was found unconscious. Her blood alcohol level was so high that the emergency room physician was surprised that she was still alive. The case was prosecuted. Right before the trial, the offenders pled. One received 1 year in the county jail, and the others received probation with no time served at all. I got involved in this case 5 years later when I was the director of the Rape Crisis Center in this town, and the fraternity had petitioned to be allowed back on campus. They were banned because it was discovered that not only was there this gang rape, but there had been others, some of which were videotaped, and not only at this campus, but at other campuses. And so the fraternity was banned from campus for 5 years, and I got involved 5 years later as the fraternity was petitioning to come back on campus, and they were denied that petition. The public discourse at the time of this case was this. The defense attorney said that this young woman, 18, could have been anybody's daughter. Your beautiful daughter you send off to college, she's excited, you're nervous, she's nervous, or your sister, yourself. And the public discourse was that she had multiple personalities, and that one of her personalities was a young woman who liked to get drunk and have sex with multiple men. Young men on campus who were interviewed in the school paper at that time said, yeah, what happened was really bad, but really it was her fault. I mean, she liked it. We heard she wanted it, she liked it, and so can you really blame these guys? When I got involved in the case 5 years later, the furor had died down, but we all know that the sexual violence was still occurring. I saw online last night not only this case, but many of these gang rapes from that same period of time that happened at fraternity parties and other kinds of parties on college campuses. So I had to ask myself last night as I was just reading and reading till literally midnight about these gang rapes, two things. One, how do we as a society raise young men to be so callous towards the lives of young women, so callous that you would leave a young woman sprawled naked with obscenities written, nearly dead, on the steps of a fraternity house? How do we as a society allow that to happen? And secondly, is it that much different today, 24 years later? Is it that much different? I think that the public discourse has changed. I don't think we would hear quite the same public dialogue. I don't think we would see quite the same quotes in the campus paper. But I still believe that our default position is that women, young women, lie about rape because they regret a sexual encounter. And that is our default position, I believe, still today, that plays out on college campuses and in state attorneys' offices and in police departments all across this country. When we first started looking at the rape kit backlog problem 2 years ago, and I started reading the cases of these rape kits that were backlogged, and a frighteningly high number of these, which will be no surprise to Angela, were not acquaintance rapes, were not he said, she said cases, so-called he said, she said, but were stranger rapes of teenagers who had been abducted after school and raped for hours and then dumped somewhere and made their way to the police department expecting help. A frighteningly high percent of these cases were those where, and I thought, how could this be? I expected, as I read about the rape kit backlog, that these would be acquaintance rapes, which we know are very difficult to investigate and prosecute, but they were not. So I wondered, how could this be the case? So I started looking online, probably again at midnight somewhere. I don't sleep that well, I should say. So I started looking online again, and I found an actual manual from a law enforcement agency that trained in which officers were trained that you should be suspicious of teenage girls who claim they were raped after school because they were probably doing something else and they were afraid of getting in trouble, so they told their parents they had been raped. That was the training materials. Now, I want to say today that I think that this has changed, and I want to point to the leadership of the Austin Police Department as one, but Monica and the Alliance of Sexual Violence can tell you of many others. We know the Baltimore Police Department is really making a difference now because they discovered they had such a problem. I heard the commissioner speak last year at a meeting on the rape kit backlog, and he said we had to take a hard look and examine ourselves. So I believe that law enforcement practices are improving. I believe that public discourse is improving. But until we change that default position that women lie because they regret a sexual encounter, we will not really address this problem. I do want to tell you about some of the good work of this administration, and you'll hear more as we go through the day. I want to commend Assistant Secretary Ruslan Ali from the Department of Education, because she was the first in this administration to say, we can use Title IX, a law that we think of being about girls in sports, but is really about equal access to education. She said, we can use Title IX as a tool for college campuses to better address this problem. And so last year, just about a year ago, we released new guidance for colleges and universities about their responsibilities under Title IX to respond to and prevent sexual assault. Vice President Biden and Secretary Duncan traveled to the University of New Hampshire to announce that guidance. And on that day, the Vice President said, you know, this is about who we are as a nation. It's about our collective values. It's about who we are as people. He said, why am I here at the University of New Hampshire when there's so much going on in the world? He said, it's because this is a measure that we use for other countries. It's a measure we should use for ourselves as well. In January, the Department of Justice announced a change to the Uniform Crime definition of rape, a long overdue change. It was last updated in 1929. Advocacy groups had been asking for this for many years, and this new definition expands the definition of rape that we use to collect national crime statistics to include the full range of what we know today to be rape. Statistics matter because people matter. Valerie Jarrett said that on the day that the FBI announced this change, because when people are raped, young women and young men, they should see their experiences reflected in our national crime data. Last summer, Vice President Biden held the first ever cabinet-level meeting to focus on the rates of sexual assault and dating violence experienced by young women ages 16 to 24, because he believes this is the place where we have the most opportunity to make a difference. When a young woman is sexually assaulted as a teen, she's much more likely to be sexually assaulted again as an adult. And so by finding out about her experience and intervening and getting her support and help, we hope that we can break that cycle. On that day, the Vice President announced our Apps Against Abuse Challenge, which was a challenge to partner up technology innovators with advocates to use technology to help intervene in and prevent sexual assault and dating violence. And we have two winners of that challenge. Circle of Six and On Watch are the names of the apps. They're incredible. If you have a young daughter going off to college, you want her to have one of these apps. They help her connect up with her circle of support so that somebody can come get her if she needs help, or just call her if she needs to talk. So Circle of Six is available for download on iTunes today, and On Watch will be shortly. You will hear much more from Bea Hansen at the Office on Violence Against Women and others as we go throughout the day about all the great work that's going on within this administration under the leadership of President Obama and Vice President Biden. So I just want to end by, let's go forward in time, because I took us back 24 years. So it is my belief that when we go forward, so that will be the year 2036, that we will, first of all, a lot of us will be very old, and we will look back at something that is by then just a distant memory, a distant problem, and we will say that this is the point in time when we really started to make a difference. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Our next welcoming speaker is Beatrice Hansen, Principal Deputy Director, U.S. Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women. Bea?
Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Dr. Coe. The Office of Violence Against Women is just so proud to be part of this crowd here and part of the work that you all are doing each and every day in addressing issues of violence against women and issues around addressing sexual assault. Sexual assault is Lynn, Lynn's passion is always very moving to me in the work that she's done over the years in this area. And the issue of sexual assault continues to be a huge conundrum for us as a community of people working on the issue of violence against women. And I'm joined here by a number of my colleagues of the Office on Violence Against Women who work with us to struggle to address the issue and the dynamics of this issue, as well as advocates and other folks in federal government. Dr. Coe mentioned some of the statistics a little bit, as did Lynn. when we look at the issue of sexual violence on college campuses, and this is crucial to be addressing this issue now, because we look at that age range as really being the age where violence is happening in a serious way. Dr. Ko talked about 1 in 5 women being victimized in college, and we talk about these statistics, and that's 20% of college-age women are coming into college and are either raped or an attempted rape is happening. So we're talking about big, big numbers, and the response has not been to date where we need it to be in terms of looking at what that impact is on women and men and the whole college system. We know about the trauma that happens to women when they've been sexually assaulted, the impact that it has on their lives, their susceptibility for further rape and sexual assault, and their impact on relationships as they move through life. We know about that kind of trauma and the impact that it has on school, particularly, where it tends to lead to poorer grades, dropping out, and other kind of behavior that may not be so healthy for them in the long run. Dr. Ko talked about the issue of alcohol-facilitated rape and how alcohol is often used. I think the media is focused much more on drug-facilitated rape, which is a serious problem, but the majority, the kind of incapacitation mechanisms that are used by offenders is overwhelmingly alcohol. Alcohol is easy to find. Alcohol is fun to drink, and it's socially very acceptable to use. So alcohol is used a lot, and is a major way in looking at incapacitation. We look at, and then there's the other issue of reporting, because those kind of incapacitated rapes are the kinds of rapes that are least likely to be reported. You're much less likely to report a crime when you feel like in some way as a victim that you've been complicit. I did choose to drink, or sometimes there was a forced drinking, but there's much more tendency for the victim to blame herself around those kinds of rapes. And so the reporting level is much, much lower. So we have that issue with a reporting rate that's very, very low. We've got a prevalence rate that's very high, so we have a confluence that's happening in our college and university campuses all across the country. And we have campuses who often fail to respond. And there's been, and Lynn talked about this, there's been a lot of work in the administration. We've done a lot of partnerships with college campuses to try to reverse that. But still, there's something that we have to get over in terms of public perception of what's going on those college campuses and what the dynamics are really behind those rapes and sexual assaults. In one study, 63% of college rapists reported that they committed repeated rapes, and the average was 6 rapes for each of those. So college campus rapists are not doing, for the most part, 63% are saying that they've done an average of 6 rapes. So it's not the kind of crime that we think about with college rape as she was a little drunk, he was a little drunk, sex went a little too far. And more, and Dr. Lisak has done a lot of work in this area of looking at offenders and college offenders, that those offenders are very much more like sexual predators, having repeated violence and repeated rapes, as well as other kinds of violent crime, rather than the sort of one-off thing that we often think about in the media and what we think about. And the question is for us is how do we turn this around, and how do we change some of that, the knowledge and the understanding, and also change the way that campuses focus on this and seeing the campus's role in terms of looking at offenders and holding offenders accountable for those crimes. We've made enormous progress in dealing with some of those issues, and the Office on Violence Against Women has been very focused on looking at campuses and looking at what campuses are doing in terms of addressing some of these crimes. I'll do a little bit of background on the office. The office started based on the Violence Against Women Act in 1994, and that Violence Against Women Act was based on a lot of women and some men, very forward-thinking men, getting together to talk about the issue of violence against women, and we have many advocates in the room here too. Looking at how do we expand services that are available for victims, how do we expand law enforcement response to violence against women, and making sure that there's consistency around the country. So a big role of the Violence Against Women Act was to create those systems and start to create grant programs and funding streams to law enforcement, prosecutors' offices, and over the years have grown to include campuses, including working with children and youth, engaging men to address issues of violence against women. So far, we've awarded over $4 billion to local law enforcement and victim service agencies across the country. So a big focus of funding is going to local areas around the country to try to expand those services, especially in areas that have unmet needs based on population or based on geography or lack of other resources that are available. Crimes on campuses raise very, very unique issues and challenges that Congress addressed by creating a special program that deals with dating violence, sexual violence, and sexual assault and stalking on campus. And Myrta Charles, who's here with us, is actually runs that program here for OVW and one of many OVW staff that are here. And the campus program that we have is really dedicated to encourage colleges and universities to adapt very comprehensive and coordinated responses to victims, which is not happening in many places right now. So dealing with creating partnerships between local law enforcement and the campus, campuses often have their own campus law enforcement, which may have good or many times not so good relationships with local law enforcement. So some of the role of our campus program grants are to make sure that there's an established connection between the campus law enforcement and local law enforcement, and make those connections. Also creating prevention, education. Our campus grants require that all incoming freshmen are given, and fresh women are given, fresh people are given access to information about violence prevention and the impact of sexual violence on the campus. Also, we do some work in terms of creating some specific technical assistance around increased better lighting and security, so that we're trying to create a campus community that's really addressing violence against women issues. Since fiscal year 1999, which is when the campus grants just started, we distribute over $125 million to 346 institutions around the country. And those institutions range from different kinds of colleges and universities, from four-year universities to two-year colleges, technical colleges, colleges that are in part of the historically black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and institutions, colleges that focus on addressing issues in Hispanic and Latino communities. So the whole range of colleges to provide them with an opportunity to address the issue of sexual violence. The program also is been working on some policy initiatives. We had a campus summit with about 60 college and university campuses in October of last year to start to look at how do we partner more closely with the federal government and campuses to help enhance and support violence against women. We're also working with the Department of Education to put together a web page so that campus and university presidents can go right online and look at issues of violence against women and how can they can address violence against women on college campuses. So we're working in partnership with HHS, with the Department of Ed, and with local universities to try to do all that we can to really support the focus on sexual violence on campus and make campuses safer for women and for men as well. We have our current solicitation is open, so if you know of anybody that's interested, it closes on May 22nd. So if anybody wants to go to grants.gov, that website, they can see our solicitation. So I want to thank you all, and thank you, Francis, again, and HHS for putting this together, and thank you all for being here to commemorate Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Thank you.
And I'd now like to present to you Bernard Melican, Director of the Office of Community Orienting Policing Services. That's the COPS program at the Department of Justice.
Thank you, Francis, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start by thanking the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office on Women's Health and Violence Against Women Steering Committee, and our own counterparts from the Department of Justice, particularly Bea Hansen in the Office of Violence Against Women. On behalf of the COPS office and on behalf of law enforcement, where I spent the bulk of my career before coming to Washington, it's truly a privilege to be here. The environment that's been discussed so far and will continue to be discussed, particularly the issue of sexual violence on campus, clearly has a dimension to this problem that I suspect has been underappreciated for a very long time. I've been in this business long enough to remember a woman that most of you probably never heard of. Her name is Gail Abarbanel. Gail Abarbanel started the Rape Treatment Center in Santa Monica, California in the mid-1970s when people questioned whether such a center served any purpose whatsoever. It was the first effort, really, to have one place where a victim could go and go through the reality of what the criminal justice system demanded in a supportive, almost loving environment, and to get the support services that both Lynn and Bea spoke of sort of post that event. Since that time, that is, I suspect it would be an overstatement to say it has become the norm, but we are certainly at least moving in the right direction. And that's why the collaboration that's here today is so critical and so important. I was a police chief for a long time. I've seen too many crimes of this nature. The story that Lynn told brought back memories of too many places that I've stood, too many rooms that I've stood in, too many victims that I've talked to, too many hospitals that I've been in, and too many times that, quite honestly, I felt as though my efforts were inadequate and not serving the victim or society very well. The two questions that Lynn's story brought to my mind, though, were two things. One, what happened to that young lady over the last 24 years? Where is she? How did her life turn out? And the other thing is, I will guarantee you that there were a lot more than 4 men standing around that room in the fraternity party. And the question then is, what were they doing? And why didn't they intervene? And some of the work that COPS and OVW and others have done on this issue of bystander involvement, I think assumes much greater importance, particularly on when we talk about campus sexual violence. We know that when young people are victims of crime, when we know that they witness crime and don't do anything, certainly on campus, we know that there are unique challenges there. There's this sense, every one of my kids went to a different college, a different kind of college, and every one of them got into trouble in some way, shape, or form. There's this sense that they've gone to this place where maybe the first time where anything can go. The problem is it's supposed to be a safe place for anything to go, and so that's why this work becomes incredibly important. We believe that the federal government has an important role to play. We also know that government alone cannot stop violence on campus. We know that it is essential to develop campus-based coordinated responses that include campus victim services, campus law enforcement, health providers, housing officials, administrators, student leaders, and every other group that's involved in comprising the campus community. We know that if we are going to be successful, this coordinated community response must be linked to the local criminal justice agency and service providers. It cannot be that the campus is an island unto itself, divorced from the community that surrounds it. For our part, the COPS office has produced more than 1,000 information products and distributed more than 6 million publications through our online resource information center, including resources on acquaintance rape of college students, creating an effective stalking protocol, police community partnerships to address domestic violence, just to name a few. The COPS office, with the guidance of the Attorney General, also made dealing with rape and sexual violence a priority, and we utilized a portion of our funding last fall, our hiring funding, for special projects aimed at reducing sexual attacks on college campuses. It is the first time that the COPS hiring dollars were used in any way outside of the sort of competitive formula, but targeted a specific problem. In Allentown, Pennsylvania, for example, we funded 10 new police officer positions who were specifically hired to apply a stronger focus and resource to stop sexual assaults in and around the college campuses in Allentown. Projects such as that are underway in Allentown demonstrate that community policing can have a significant role in combating sexual violence. To close with the premise that I opened, It's always been the focus for me personally to understand how people could stand around and watch something happen and watch this unfold. And I believe that it comes from two places. One is a sense that maybe it wouldn't be cool because somehow the suspects, the perpetrators, count for more than the victim. And secondly, this sense that, well, maybe it won't make a difference. Part of what we have to do is convince and demonstrate people that their actions can and will make a difference. Since 2009, the COPS Office has funded the development and implementation of the Campus Threat Assessment Training Program, and within a year and a half of inaugurating that program, a multidisciplinary training curriculum was provided to over 1,000 representatives from 350 colleges. In the true spirit of community policing, this training focuses on proactively helping a person of concern to solve problems, to motivate them to consider harm and connect them with the necessary resources. I cannot stress the importance of the multidisciplinary response to interpersonal violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The impact on victims, the impact on institutions, the impact on everyone that watches it cannot simply be overstated. To use the question that Lynn used, when we send our 18-year-old daughters to college, we ought to get them back the same way that we sent them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Now, Dev, you've heard what a wonderful collaboration we have across the federal government. I would like for you now to listen to a survivor, my friend Angela Rose, who's the founder of PAVE, Promoting Awareness and Victim Empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So this thing wants to perfect. Thank you very much. Good morning. Great. Thank you very much, Francis. And thank you to Lynn Rosenthal for your leadership and for your kind words this morning. And for everybody here, thank you for taking time out of your day to join with us as this call to action addressing issues of campus sexual violence. And what is so important that not only do we look at this from the aspects of the government, different governments coming together, but we need to look at this issue from the survivor's perspective. And I'm here to share not only my experience, but experiences of other survivors in our brief time that we have together today. So this is difficult dialogue. I founded PAVE, which is Promoting Awareness Victim Empowerment. And what we work to do is to shatter the silence of sexual violence all over the country and abroad. I founded PAVE 10 years ago, and we now have nearly 50 chapters and affiliates, and many of them are on college campuses. But for everybody at home watching on webcast, and even for some of us in this room, a lot of us personally have been affected by sexual violence. So I just want to say that this is a safe space. And this is going to be very solution-focused because we know all the issues. We're going to talk about some of the issues, but really be focused on the solution. And also talk about uniting the national movement to shatter the silence of sexual violence. And what I want to do first is share my experience of what catapulted me into doing this work. I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life to shattering the silence of sexual violence. And for me, it happened right before I went to college. I was 17 years old, and I was working at a shopping mall. And it was broad daylight one day as I was walking across the parking lot towards my car, and something stopped me in my tracks where I saw a person about 10 to 20 feet behind me walking towards me. All my internal alarms were going off, but, you know, young women, we don't think that things like this can happen, and so I just turned bright red. I had been singing out loud, so I was just embarrassed that he had heard me singing, and I put my key into the lock of my car, and I suddenly see the shadow come up behind me, and I'm grabbed from behind, and he puts a knife to my throat. His car is parked just a couple of feet away from mine, and he throws me into the car, and he takes my wrists, and he binds my hands behind my back. And he takes Band-Aids and puts Band-Aids in sunglasses to conceal my eyes. This happened in an instant. He didn't know that I could see, but I could see just to the corners of my eyes. And it was a conscious decision I made in that car. I said, if I get out of this situation alive, he is not getting away with it. And so I remembered all these details about his face, about the route that we were going. I knew that he had done this before because he was so practiced. And he drove me to a forest preserve where I was sexually assaulted, but the whole route and the whole time that I was kidnapped, I just kept trying to personalize myself. I said, I'm not going to tell anybody. You have to let me go. My parents are going to be looking for me. And he wound up letting me go. And he dropped me off, and I was still bound. What shocked me is when I went to the police station, I wasn't believed by the detective. I waited for 2 hours for the detective, and he accused me of lying. And it was such a re-traumatizing experience to be through something so difficult and to not be believed. And so what happened was I did a sketch of his face with 2 new detectives that they put on the case about a week later, and that's how they caught him. The sketch of his face was so accurate that they put it to all these police stations all over the Chicago news, and someone recognized him. And not only had he done this before, he was on parole for murder. And I got together with his previous victims, including the family of the girl that he had killed, and that was the start of my advocacy work. We changed laws in Illinois. We really got the whole community together. But all along the journey, so many people would stop me to tell me their story. And overwhelmingly, they had been sexually assaulted by somebody that they knew and trusted, old high school teachers, friends of my family. But so many people said to me, but Angela, I've never told anyone. And I was shocked at how widespread this was, but it was so silent and so hard to talk about. And what we realize is many of us in this room know how pervasive sexual violence is, that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys before the age of 18 will be sexually abused. But what's so incredible about the work on college campuses is that 1 in 4 college women will be sexually abused during her time at the university, but 9 out of 10 women in college who are raped don't report the crime. It's so difficult to talk about, and it's so difficult to report that we see that pervasive underreporting. And women in their first 6 months of college are at their greatest risk for sexual assault. But the stranger danger myth, right? What happened to me, that's what a lot of college women think of when they think of sexual assault. The stranger assault, the weapon, the kidnapping, all these things that law and order have taught us to fear. But typically it's somebody that we know and we trust. And as I travel across the country and share my experience and educate college audiences at the fact that it is usually somebody that we know and trust, it's amazing to me how often college women, there's a line of people that want to share their experience with me. How often young women don't realize what happened to them was rape if it was committed by somebody that they knew, a date, an acquaintance, a friend. So many young women are dealing with this weight of being sexually assaulted or raped without knowing what to even call it. And that's a huge problem. Come on, technology. Well, moving on. We won't need that. So here we are coming to being solution-focused. One thing that PAVE has done, we created a Safe Campus, Strong Voices campaign, and it really focuses on a lot of issues of sexual violence for college campuses to know your rights on campus and know your options, as well as stepping in and how to help a survivor. Studies show that the first person that a survivor tells, if they react well, that greatly impacts the healing process. And we also know that sexual violence, this is not a woman's issue. This is a human's issue. This affects everybody. So PAVE over the last 10 years has been doing an incredible job of engaging men to be a part of the solution. And we also know that there's a lot of male survivors. I was just on Penn State's campus last week doing a whole program with Big Voice Pictures, who created the film Boys and Men Healing, talking about how often boys and men are sexually abused as well. And even as I speak across the country, I'll have a lot of young college men come up to me that they had been abused, oftentimes as a child, but they're dealing with these issues in college. A lot of times it's a female babysitter or somebody that they know and they trust. And so a couple of other proactive things that you all can do on college campuses. We have a whole peer education program that was piloted at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I started PAVE.
And students get class credit to become PAVE peer educators. There's a class called PAVE in the School of Social Work, and so we see how important it is to have everything integrated together through the university. And the Safe Campus Strong Voices campaign, which includes a lot of the peer ed material, focuses on the bystander intervention piece, which is so incredibly important because as the examples were talked about with the gang rapes, you know that there was people in that space that felt uncomfortable, felt that, well, they didn't want to be the one to say something. Well, why doesn't that guy or that person be the one to say something? And so in essence, people don't say anything at all. And so we really need to engage people, and that's why this card that people stick in their wallets for stepping in is so powerful, and you can stop by the PAVE booth to get some of our materials. But we also need to take a very positive and proactive approach. This is a very tough issue. So one other aspect of PAVE is that we love to use art. And I think that using art is a great way to shatter the silence in a very upbeat and positive way. So we have what's called the Binding Project, where everybody writes one word that empowers them on these zip tie bracelets, and they wear one, and then they send a duplicate bracelet back to us, and you can see them on our table over here, but we're gonna do an installation art piece with these thousands of binding bands with these empowerment words. And the notion behind the project was when I was kidnapped, that's what was used to bind my wrists behind my back. So taking ownership over the ties that bind us symbolically, very powerful. We also have a postcard campaign through the Safe Campus, Strong Voices, where people collage or they draw, whatever it is, to shatter the silence in their own way. And it is very healing. And what I love about PAVE is that it's not just for survivors, it's for everybody. You know, I look at the breast cancer movement, something that in the past has been pretty difficult to talk about 10, 15 years ago, but here we are where everybody wants to be a part of it, right? The NFL players are wearing pink gloves. It's something that really has transformed into a national movement, and that's where I see sexual assault and rape and abuse in the next couple of years. We're working with Hollywood, we've partnered with MTV's Sarah Rice, and really working from multiple angles and really looking at this issue as one of creating this, uniting the national movement. Every person knows somebody who's been sexually assaulted. But unfortunately, a lot of times we don't know because the silence and the shame and the victim blaming is so pervasive. Even in court, they asked me what I was wearing when I was kidnapped. Should that make a difference? Absolutely not. But you see this victim blaming language, and a lot of people, even on college campuses, I get asked a lot of times, well, there's a lot of false report rates, right, for sexual assault, a lot of these misconceptions. But the false report rate for sexual violence is 2%, which is the same false report rate for any other crime. And in fact, more people false report their own death for insurance than actually false report sexual assault. That is true. So we need to educate ourselves, educate our communities, and it is so important for us to be the voice for every person who's been silenced by violence. Thank you so much.
What a powerful story. We're glad that she's a survivor of this. We'll now have stats by Dr. Howard Spavin from the Centers for Disease Control. I'm sure you've heard about the newest data that has come from CDC, and if you hadn't, he will brief you on this very quickly. Thank you so much for being here with us, all the way from Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you. Sorry about this. I am technologically impaired.
Okay. Keep going. Keep going. There she is. All right, there you are.
Good morning. I'm really pleased to have been invited today to speak on this subject. But I must say that I really look forward to the day when I don't have to be invited. And one of the things that we are clearly learning better and better is that the more we know about this, the more convincing it is that this is truly preventable. and that while we need to have services to respond to this, we really need to invest in preventing this in the first place. And I'll be presenting some information that really makes the case for why we must do this, and do this as aggressively as possible. Before I get started, I do want to say that the work we do is in the Center for Injury Prevention and Control at the CDC. And you'll notice that we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, but what that really tells you is how new this field is. That it's only been 20 years since it's been truly recognized that injury in general is preventable. And it's even more recent that we've learned and understood that violence was preventable as well. So in many ways, we're very early in this process, but we have a field that's moving very quickly. Oops. I'm going to skip a few of these, if I can. Okay, I'm going to be presenting some information from the NISVIS survey, as we affectionately call it. It's been referred to by other speakers. But what I want to say about this is that it is probably the most comprehensive and certainly the most recent survey about this subject matter. And what's particularly important about this one is that while it's a telephone survey, it's the first survey to use cell phones, which means that it is the most comprehensive population-based survey that's been done in a number of years, given the growth of population that only has cell phones. It is also a national sample, and in time we will have state-specific data as well. You've had a lot of numbers, but I'm going to give you some more. Almost 1.5 women reported having been raped in the past year prior to the survey. Almost 1 in 5 women report being raped in their lifetime. I want to say that again. 1 in 5 women have experienced a rape at some point in their lifetime. So the numbers you're hearing about college campuses really expand to the entire population. About 1 in 70 men also report having been raped in their lifetime. So while this is a much smaller group, it is not an insignificant group. And if you look at a broader range of sexual violence, the numbers get even larger. So we are dealing with an issue with a magnitude that's so unacceptable, it's even hard to speak about. Now, relative to colleges and college campuses, what is very clear is that this is an issue that is experienced very early in life. Almost 80% of women who are raped before their 25th birthday. 40% of women who are raped prior to entering college. So in terms of dealing with this issue on college campuses, it's not just dealing with what happens on the campus, it's dealing with the trauma that people bring with them when they come to the campuses as well. And this is important for a number of reasons that I'll get into. Also, while they're, oops, I don't even have that up there. Hang on. Oops. Where is the colors are somehow missing from this, but that's not important. As I said, I'm technologically impaired. While the data isn't up here for men, almost 30% of men who have been raped are raped before their 10th birthday. So again, while it is a smaller group, there is a small but significant group of men who are entering college with having experienced this trauma and experienced this trauma very, very early in their lives. Again, a huge issue that doesn't just resolve itself. This isn't a cut that you put a Band-Aid on and have it heal. It has lifelong consequences. And part of the consequences are that if one experiences a rape early in one's life, the risk of experiencing further rapes is greatly increased compared to women who haven't been raped earlier in their lives. Why this happens is not entirely clear, but it is a huge issue. So given the number of women entering college who have already experienced this, part of why it's important to recognize this is that this is a particularly vulnerable population. Now, the reason this is important well beyond the immediate trauma is that there are huge increased risks for a whole range of health problems as a result of these experiences. So the cost in healthcare is enormous, above and beyond the cost, the human cost of this in terms of the trauma and the long-term emotional effects of this. And we are finding increasingly higher rates of chronic disease in individuals who have been raped. Women who clearly bear the larger burden of this have even more issues than men. And up there is a list of several of the chronic illnesses that women in particular show higher rates of, including diabetes and asthma. Men and women experience a whole range of long-term health problems as well. And I want to specifically focus on the mental health issue because the rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in individuals who have been raped is huge, and we really do understand, increasingly understand, the consequences of post-traumatic stress disorder in terms of ability to maintain relationships, ability to work, ability to function in multiple social settings, and the rate of post-traumatic stress disorder is particularly high in women who have been raped. So it affects both men and women, but women disproportionately. Now, one of the issues is we don't know enough about what happens on college campuses, and we really do need to learn more, because the college campus setting, as has been said over and over again, is a particularly vulnerable setting where young women are away from their social support system, entering a new environment, experiencing things that they probably have not experienced earlier, not just in terms of exposure to drinking, but a whole set of other dynamics. And we really do need to understand what is unique about college campuses, because that will give us further insights in terms of what we can do on college campuses. Now, we are trying to understand this better, and in particular, there's an increasing focus, and again, this has been mentioned by other speakers, on the role of bystanders in this. As at least several of the examples have been put out there, these don't happen in back alleys. These happen in settings where there's often other people around, especially in the context of alcohol use and parties and the kinds of events where girls are particularly vulnerable. And one of the elements of preventing this is having people intervene and feel comfortable intervening to stop events as opposed to merely watching. And in fact, watching is essentially endorsing this behavior. And this is a huge problem. And we're beginning to identify fairly solid curricula and interventions that are engaging bystanders and beginning to shift the value system which drives how people behave in these circumstances. Now, there are also a number of resources that college campuses should take advantage of. Oops. What happened there? Well, there are several programs that exist that are important elements of of responding to this. The first is under VAWA, under the Violence Against Women Act. Every state receives funding for a rape education program within their state health departments. More and more of these programs are looking at how they can work on college campuses around prevention. And if college campuses are looking for some help or support around this, one of the first things they should do is contact their RPE program within their state health departments. Most of them are fairly easy to find, either on the state health department websites or by calling main numbers. In addition, we are funding 14 states for coalition building around intimate partner violence. Given that a great deal of sexual violence occurred within intimate partner relationships, these are also groups that can be called on. This is generally more local. It's not through state health departments. It's either through city health departments or through independent coalitions within local communities. So for those of you who have these in your community, I strongly encourage that you seek them. Oh, there it is. There's really just some basic messages around this. One is that a key element of prevention is promoting healthy relationships. This needs to happen on school campuses, but it also needs to happen earlier. We really need to start when kids are young because that's when the hard wiring happens. That's where the values and attitudes take place. We must hold perpetrators accountable. That's been an issue in the past. It needs to get better. And we very much must identify evidence-based strategies to deal with violence prevention. I just want to go to my last slide. If you want more information on the NSFIS study, and you go to the CDC website, and specifically the CDC website /violence prevention, there'll be a direct link to a great deal of information on this study, and I strongly encourage all of you to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For those of you that didn't get it, and I was looking at some of you don't have the handouts for those presentations from Angela and from Dr. Spivak were on the table in the front. So if you didn't get them coming in, be sure to get them on the way out because you'll have all of the wealth of information that they've tried to present to us in a very short time. I now would like to welcome, they're in the back now, thank you very much. I would now like to welcome our panel of experts. This is our response panel. You've heard a lot of people talking about a lot of data, a lot of things that go on, and these are experts within the community from across the country that will present their responses to what they do, what they have in their communities. They range from North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Green Dot Center, the University of South Carolina Gamecocks, yay, okay, and Montclair State University, and their bios are in your folder also. So I would like to go as they're listed, and they will give you a very keen aspect of reality base from their perspectives as they work on these issues within their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Monica Johnson-Hostler, and as Frances mentioned, I'm the director at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I'm also the board chair of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, which is a national policy entity that works to ensure that we continue all the great work that many of our welcome speakers mentioned through the Violence Against Women Act is our primary work, which also includes the Rape Prevention Education Program, as Dr. Spivak mentioned, goes directly to every state in a formula for rape prevention in schools, but also for the Sexual Assault Services Program, which is direct services for rape crisis centers across the country, that also goes to each state in a formula as well. And so we do a lot of policy work, and I must say, coming from a coalition, and for those of you who don't know, especially those of you who may be tuned in through the webcast is there's a state coalition in every state and territory. Again, thanks to quite a bit of contribution from the Office on Violence Against Women through the Violence Against Women Act that allows service providers and rape crisis centers and coalitions to ensure that there is not only a response, as Mr. Mellicany mentioned about rape crisis centers starting in Santa Monica, but now there are over 1,300 across the country, and I happen to live in North Carolina, which I will say is a state on the rise, but we are one of the states that have the most rape crisis centers in the country. We have 92 rape crisis centers providing services to all 100 counties in North Carolina. And while it is very sad to talk about the number of services that exist in this country, it is also a moment for us to take pride as Americans that we have invested in ensuring that we can provide services and also at the same time work on prevention, which you'll hear from my colleague, Dorothy Edwards, shortly more about prevention. But just the mere fact that the government is invested in victims and invested in ensuring that there are less victims, as Angela spoke about, in how we shatter the violence. The reality is this really is everyone's problem. And one of the things that I always say, especially now that we've began to engage men, is this should have always been an issue for mankind. This has always been an issue that everyone has been touched by. And so for that, I'd like to thank both Department of Health and Human Services as well as Department of Justice for not only this event, but for their ongoing support of the services and prevention work that we do across the country as we begin to address the issue of sexual violence in a more holistic and, quite frankly, in a more global way as as Office on Violence Against Women has started to verge out and started to do more work internationally and looking at how we can actually learn from each other, not just in the U.S., but across the world in terms of sexual violence has no boundaries and no limits. And so I think there is still a lot of work for us to do, but I am definitely grateful for the government and for those two entities who are really invested in the work that we continue to do across the country. Like many people, everyone has a story of how they began this work. And quite frankly, I think I've done several SAM events, both on the federal level, but also in the state of North Carolina in the past 9 days as we commemorate and acknowledge Sexual Assault Awareness Month. But when I was told that this was the topic, it reminded me of how I came to this work. I went to a historically black college and university, which I'm extremely proud to say I've gone to several and received 2 degrees from 2 different historically black colleges and universities. But I came to this work as a result of I have no siblings, I'm the only child. I moved into an all-girls dorm, the oldest dorm on the college campus that I went to, and immediately gained 12 new friends on my hall. For me, as an only child, it was an extremely exciting time. My entire family came to drop me off, and they all cried as they left me at college, and they were very nervous about what would happen. But nobody ever talked to me about sexual violence. I just knew that they were nervous. Mostly because I'm the only child and they were just really afraid for me to be gone. But I also know now as an adult, it's also about safety. I have a 6-year-old daughter, so I'm able now to look back and say, wow, there was far more than them missing having me at home in those eyes as they left me on that college campus. 1 week in the college, and as you all, if you can't tell, I am quite the extrovert, so I had lots of friends, and so my room was actually called the Rec, like the Recreation Center, and so there were about 3 people in my room, and one of my hallmates came into the room, and she just matter-of-factly talked to us about being sexually assaulted by a football player. Again, very interesting. I don't believe in coincidence, but there were also 4 other football players, very similar to Lynn's story, who watched this young woman be sexually assaulted. What I remember most about that moment is she had a flat affect. So there was no emotion. She was literally recounting a story to us. I must say, in 7th grade, they told me I was going to be a helper. I didn't really know what that meant at that time. But when she was telling me, I looked around the room, and everybody was also no affect, just kind of taking the story in. And for me, I have to say, this was the first up-close and personal experience of someone recounting their own sexual assault to me. And so I was outraged, and part of me didn't really understand why nobody else seemed to have any kind of impact or any statements, not only about what happened to this young woman who was recanting her story to us, but more so about what we should be doing as college students and what we should be doing as peers and young women on that college campus. And so I sat there and, actually told the story, and people said, "Oh, is there anything you want us to do?" And she was like, "No, I just need to share with somebody." So she left. A few days later, I knocked on her door and asked if I could talk to her by herself, and asked her, "Are you sure there's nothing you want to do? Is there anybody you want to tell? Is there anything that we can do?" And she said, "No, but thank you for asking, because you're actually the first person who actually I feel like that somebody actually listened to what I said." And she broke down crying and said that she had not had any emotion until I knocked on her door. So needless to say, she didn't want to do anything about her assault, but I definitely was going to have an attack on that campus. We came up with flyers. We posted them around. I went to the administration. Literally, it was a private school. I walked up to the president's door. I didn't really know what that meant at 18. I just kind of knocked on the door. I was like, "There's something you should be doing on this college campus." Needless to say, I did not see the president, and nobody responded from the president's house. But I didn't stop there. I mean, I continued to push the issue and really try to engage other students on what our role and responsibility was to not just protect this young woman, but also to protect each other. Again, not having siblings, I actually thought people believed in I am my brother's and I am my sister's keeper. Little did I know that actually wasn't true, having no siblings. So that was a lesson learned. And I learned many valuable lessons. But I graduated college early. And 3 years later, my roommate said, "There's a job open at a brand new agency that's opening. It's a rape crisis center. Thought you might want to take it if you're not really ready to go to grad school." I applied, and about 5 minutes into the interview, they were like, "You got the job." Now, partially, I think it's because it was a rural community and nobody else wanted to work at a rape crisis center. But nonetheless, I got the job. I was their first employee. The county manager's wife became the director just to do the fiscal piece, and my job was to figure out what a rape crisis center should look like in a rural community. I was excited. I called home. I told my mother, my grandparents, and the first thing my grandmother said to me is, "Now, baby, you remember that incident you had at college? Black people don't talk about rape." And that sticks with me, and I keep telling that story, and I keep using her sincere and pure language around that, because for me, that was the second time that I felt kind of hit in the gut to say that people really, really felt like that this was an issue that we shouldn't be discussing. And more so, I felt like it was the second time somebody was saying to me, "Perhaps you should do something else with your time." Needless to say, I'm not a quitter, and so 18 years, I'm still working in the anti-sexual violence movement. But I continue to do this work because until I can see and feel like we are invested in each other, we are our brothers and sisters keepers, and we ultimately realize that each individual deserves the same respect, the same equality, and the same opportunities, I don't think we'll end sexual violence. As Dr. Spivak mentioned, it is important that we start talking not just about how we end sexual violence or how we prevent it, but also about healthy sexuality, that we open the dialogue and begin talking to not just our daughters, but our sons about what relationships look like, what respect means, what do we need to do to ensure that our sons and daughters are not only not victimized, but they're not participants or bystanders in sexual violence. And quite frankly, I feel like I'll be doing this work until I can literally stand still and say, you know what, hands are joined, people are connected, and we all believe that we are invested in this country's future to protect one another, to provide the support and services we need, and that every race should be talking about sexual violence, because until we can break the silence, we'll continually perpetuate sexual violence, and each of us are a contributor if we're not part of the solution. Thank you.
I have a couple of limitations as a speaker. Number one is I can't talk and sit, and number two, I can't stand behind a podium. So I've jolted the camera operator, and can you do this? I've been asked to talk about prevention on college campus, and I've been asked to do it in 10 minutes. So if you don't mind, with your permission, for the rest of my 9 minutes and 42 seconds, I'll be talking like this, because I want to make sure you get all the information you need to go forward and really make a comprehensive decision about how you might even get involved. I'm just kidding about that part, although I was tempted. Bird's eye view of prevention on college campus is simply this. There is a reconceptualization going on about how to approach this issue. We are beginning to write a new chapter. And young men on our college campuses are beginning to reject the notion that their intersection with this issue is limited by the role of potential perpetrator. And young women are beginning to reject the notion that their intersection with the issue of sexual violence on their campus is limited to the role of potential victim. And instead, as has been referred to time and time again this morning, our young men and our young women are beginning to stand shoulder to shoulder and insist that their intersection with this issue is best defined in the role of the solution. And the framework that we are housing this redefining is bystander intervention. And let me tell you why you need to be excited about bystander intervention. 2 reasons. Number 1 is this is not a new thought. We aren't the first people to wonder about, what's the role of bystanders? In fact, you can go back as far as the Holocaust, and social scientists were asking the question that has been asked today time and time again, why do good people stand by? Why do good, law-abiding citizens who don't want their friend, their neighbor, their sorority sister to be assaulted, why do they stand by? You know what? After 60, 70 years of research, it's not a rhetorical question anymore. We know why. There is a body of research about this tall, I don't know what that is in microchips on computer, about this big, which is huge in computer land. There's a body of research that tells us exactly why good people stand by. Literally, a specific list. I can spout them off to you, 5, 6, 7 reasons why someone would stand by in a potentially high-risk situation. And even more exciting, as if you could get more excited than you are right now, even more exciting is embedded in that same body of research are the solutions. So as a prevention educator, I get to go on a college campus being greeted with young men and young women that are beginning to think, there might be a new way to do this. And I get in my hands a list of, these are the 10 reasons they're not going to intervene. And you know what? Here are the 10 things I can do to increase the likelihood that they will. Reason number 2, bystander is key, I am convinced, to reduction. It's just human history. You go back to the beginning of time, and you want to see when great change happens? It's when enough bystanders, enough individuals grab a hold of their moment, their power, and say, enough. The status quo is no longer okay. And we can look at our current day, countries around the globe, where citizens are standing going, actually, this isn't working anymore, and they are changing the course of their country. We can look at our own country, and we can look at all of the great social movements when enough individuals, enough bystanders said, no more. This has got to stop. And we watched as they changed the course of history. Alan Berkowitz, who's a great leader in this field, said there are 4 things bystanders need in order to effectively intervene. Number 1, they need to believe there is a problem. Number 2, they need to believe they are a necessary part of the solution. Number 3, they need to know what to do. Number 4, they need to know how to do it. Number 1, I believe we have made tremendous progress on. I believe, in general, people agree sexual violence on college campus is not okay. Number 3 and 4, with the body of research I just referenced, we have the knowledge we need to equip our campus community with the knowledge and skills to become effective and safe bystanders. So we got number 3 and 4 covered. I believe currently on our college campus and in the movement in general, the biggest challenge we face is in number 2, which is the notion of believing that we are a necessary part of the solution. I believe all too many of us have surrendered the power of our moment. We have kind of discarded as useless currency, like pennies we drop and it's not even worth bending down to pick it up, the power of my individual choice, my individual action at any point in time. And I think there's 3 forces at play with that. Number 1, a sense of resignation. We've been dealing with this issue for a long time. I've sat with countless students who feel like they're hearing yet another lecture on this issue once again, but they're still watching as their best friends, their sisters, their roommates are getting assaulted. Those of us in the field that have been doing it for years and years and years and years, and every once in a while we look up and we ask ourselves, gosh, am I just treading water? Lynn stood up here and said, are we better off than we were before? Are we seeing the progress that we wanted to make, and without us even consciously connecting to it? The sense of resignation settles in where the hope once was housed. And when we don't believe we can make a difference, we simply don't act. Why would we? The second force that I think is eroding our personal empowerment is the idea of minimizing the impact we could have. So often, how many of you have ever had the thought, I'm just one person. I'm just one person. I can't change the world. And so with that notion of it's too big for me, again, we go inactive. The third reason is this idea of a hero. In this day and age, it's so easy to look outside ourselves and say, there's something external that's going to come in and fix this. The next charismatic personality, the next body of legislation, the next funding stream is going to come in and make this okay. There's a quote often attributed to Helen Keller that says something to the effect of the world changes not just by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but by the aggregate of tiny pushes of each honest worker. And I take that a step further and say the only way this will change is when we grab hold of our tiny pushes. The world changes when we come together. The civil rights movement isn't Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a great spokesperson, and God knows he maximized his moments. The civil rights movement is the husband and wife that sat down at the table with their kids one August day in 1963 and said, gosh, can we afford to take the time off work? Can we afford to get on the bus and get up to D.C.? And when 250,000 people took their moment and said, my moment matters, that's the civil rights movement. It's the 3 or 4 African-American students that were sitting around going, gosh, I'm no Martin Luther King, but gosh, I wonder if after class we should go to that drugstore and sit at that counter. Would it matter? Would it even make a difference? I'm just 2 or 3 students, and it's just one little store in one little state in one little part of town. Will it make a difference? Because thousands and thousands believed in their moments, it did make a difference. I have to stop. I want to end with this. I saw a recent clip from a Martin Luther King speech that I'd never seen before, and he is pleading with his audience to embrace their power. He was saying, there's not a president or a law that's going to give us the freedom. It's only going to happen when we reach into our souls and write our own Emancipation Proclamation. And I leave you with the same call for our college campuses and for you personally. We want to reduce violence on our college campuses. We reach into our souls, and we reach past our fatigue, and we reach past budgetary constraints, and we reach past our fear, our individual experiences, and our politics. And we grab hold of our moment, your individual moment. Collectively, we bring our moments to the table, and the violence comes down. Thank you so much.
Hello. Doesn't everyone feel sorry for me having to follow that act? I bring you greetings. My name is Stephanie Hinton. I'm the Assistant Director for the actual Sexual Assault, Violence Intervention and Prevention Department within the University of South Carolina Student Health Services. Very briefly, I'll talk with you a little bit about what we are actually seeing on our campus, health-related issues. But first of all, let me start by saying a lot of the same things that I've talked about, what they're seeing on the national level is what I can report to you. Is a lot of what we're seeing at our college campus in Columbia, South Carolina. Let me begin by saying the first thing that we are seeing is an increase in what we call, the young kids call the hookup. Okay, the children are hooking up more. So we're seeing more assaults that are occurring by the hookup, more assaults that are occurring by friends, by buddies, by acquaintances, people I met down at the bar, things of that particular nature. We are also seeing more drug-facilitated assaults, people being roofies or things like that put in. Alcohol usage by the victim and by the perpetrator. We're seeing a little increase in some substance abuse, but we're also seeing more relationship violence. And as Dr. Spivak alluded to earlier, we're seeing more students that are coming into the university that are bringing in with them childhood trauma from some form of sexual violence. And we're also seeing re-victimization, where they've been victimized before and they're coming in. So those are some of the things that we are seeing. From the physical health standpoint, we are seeing a little bump in STDs and STIs. We're screening more for HIV and AIDS. We're seeing genital injuries such as bleeding, UTIs, pelvic inflammatory type diseases, and we're seeing the fear of unwanted pregnancies. But moreover than that, the bigger issue is, once the student come into our office and they're finding out, and they're getting cleared with those tests, they're still having the mental health effect. They have the shock, the anxiety, withdrawal. They're having loss of sleep. We're seeing self-esteem issues. And then they're also suffering from trauma. They are having dysfunctional issues to include eating disorders, sexual disorders, and behavioral disorders. From that also, we're seeing emotional health issues. There are a lot of lost trust. That was my friend I was with. He was my buddy. He was supposed to protect me. I didn't realize that this would happen to me. And we're also seeing relationships that are being damaged as a result. You have a lot of, for example, you have a lot of sister and brother fraternities. If you tell on him, that's our brother, that's our fraternity brother, this will damage our relationship within the sorority and or with the fraternity. There fallout by friends because they don't want them to tell on the buddy and on the friend. There's increased stress, and we're also seeing a lot of value questioning. Students are being sent to school, and they are taught that sexual assault, sexual violence happens by the stranger in the alley. And so when you're taught that and you bring that value to school with you, then when it doesn't happen by the stranger in the alley, but it's your friend, then you're questioning your own value system and you're questioning what you were taught as a child growing up. So what some of the outcomes that we've been seeing at the university is we've had a lot of students withdraw from school. They are unable to continue to function after they've been sexually assaulted. They're unable to function within the campus community. We see that their grades are falling. We have students that have been on scholarships and their grades are falling. The suicide risks increase. They're isolated from family and friends. They're angry. They blame themselves. They're guilty. As I mentioned before, they're having sexual dysfunction. They're self-medicating. And they're either increasing their substance abuse or beginning to indulge in substance abuse. So that's what we're seeing. So what are we doing at the University of South Carolina? We're allowing our students to get STI and STD testing directly from the lab and not having to go through the doctor. The doctor will contact them if they have a positive test. We have our 24-hour on-call crisis intervention services to include academic assistance, hospital accompaniment, safety planning, alternative housing, referral assistance. We have a separate sexual health and sexual assault office. We do 100% referral to our on-campus counseling center. We have on-call therapists after hours. We have a memorandum of agreement with our SANE doctors at all of the area hospitals around the school to provide forensic exams for students who have been sexually assaulted. We have on-campus women's care for victims as well as off-campus referrals to physicians. We're doing increased awareness as well for prevention and healthcare services through student health services. I've put a couple of copies of our Gamecock Health on the back table if you would like to pick it up. So we're trying to reach our students through various means. We have a suicide prevention coordinator in student health services, and we coordinate with our behavioral intervention team to address a lot of the alcohol issues related to that. And of course, we're collecting data to study and to find out what is going on. We have a Healthy Carolina initiative on our campus as well that puts the policies and the infrastructure together. But the biggest thing that I want to close with is on our campus, because we had a professor last year who was killed by domestic violence in South Carolina, our president, it is important for your campus's president to get on board with what's going on with your school and, you know, sound out from the top down that this will not be tolerated. And our president at the University of South Carolina, along with Ms. Ash Goins, is part of that panel, and we've created a comprehensive community to address these issues. I thank you so very much for being here, and thank you for your time.
I have to walk too. I apologize. I feel so confined. I look at the title of the symposium today, and it's a call to action. At our university, our call to action came about 12 years ago. It was a question that, as a healthcare provider, as a nurse practitioner, came to me when a student, as a patient, came and said she had been assaulted, and I couldn't help her because I didn't know how. I had no idea of the medical treatment. I had no idea what forensics meant. I didn't know what to do. The unfortunate end of that story is that we lost that student. She dropped out of school, and we helped her the best we could. But did we really help her? No. So my question when I see call to action is, how are we caring for our victims? In my lifetime, based on the statistics that Dr. Spivak has shared, I am never going to see a world that does not have sexual violence. So in the meantime, it's my obligation and all of ours as campuses to look at how are we responding to our victims? How are we caring for them? And are we giving them the care that they deserve and are entitled to? One of the things when that question and that patient came to me is that I reached out to our chief of police, who will share this presentation, and we said we need to do this different. In the research that we looked for, we found a standard of care that is in our community and across the country right now. At the same time in the 70s, during the women's movement, when all of the advocacy services were being created, there was a system called the SANE SART system that was being created by two of my healthcare colleagues, Patricia Speck and Linda Ledre, who are forensic nurses. And they were creating the forensic nursing concept. And that concept was to take nurses and to teach them how to gather evidence, but not in the just the facts kind of approach. In the approach that we are patient advocates. So the first thing we are taught when a victim comes to us is believe that victim. It is not our job to judge. And the second is to do our care in the most compassionate manner that we can and be thorough in that process. Because to undress and reveal and discuss an event that was just so traumatic to another individual and so personal after being violated is very painful. So to be able to allow that individual the opportunity to share in a safe space with an individual who believes them and is compassionate and can also gather information and evidence because we believe them to do the second focus of forensic nursing, and that is to hold offenders accountable. in our approach as forensic nurses, and I use forensic nurse. I am a sane nurse. I am actually insane, but that is my acronym, SANE. Across the country, there are now, I believe, about 180 forensic programs that train physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, RNs, to do forensic evidence gathering. Quickly, as my 1-minute notice just came up, we are integrated into a system called SART. That traditional model is law enforcement, advocacy, and forensic medical care. My colleague will share that whole system with you. But just to, since everything in healthcare is evidence-based now, the evidence that we have now of the effectiveness and the call up to action for our campuses to use the standard of care. Victims that are cared for by the same SART system, they have increased healthcare interventions, increased referrals to outside resources. They are more likely to file a police report. And we've heard over and over the underreporting of the crime. They have an increased willingness to prosecute. There is a greater quality and a larger amount of evidence. And they express that their experience reduces that additional trauma that may have occurred having to relive this experience going through the system to care. So my call to action as a forensic nurse, as having done this for quite a few years now, and as someone who has been promoting creating SART systems on campuses for almost 10 years, my call to action to all of you is to look at the SART system as a standard of care for our campuses, not just in our communities, but on our campuses itself. Thank you.
I try not to fall getting up. All right, and the last speaker here, and they say the last is best, but I don't think so. This has been a great group that we have here. I want to get into the SART system just quickly. An overview of it is, when we take a look at it, we have the three components. We have the medical forensic, we have the advocacy, and we also have the law enforcement. I'm representing the law enforcement end of it. For me, I've been in law enforcement just going on 32 years now. And sadly, I can share a lot of the horror stories that other people have talked about here, what we were doing in the past as opposed to what we are doing today. One of the biggest problems we had in law enforcement with dealing with victims of sexual violence was understanding how the victim behaved, understanding what the victim went through and what their responses were. And I throw this out to everybody there. If you are working with victims of sexual violence, ask yourselves two questions. Do you understand victim response? And do you understand offender behavior? Because if you do not know those two things, you should not be dealing with victims. And that's one of the problems that we have had. In law enforcement, we know that a person who tells us a story and then changes their story, victim or not, is normally, and if I had a police officer here, they'd be yelling out lying. That's what we're trained to do. When stories change, they're probably lying. But the reality is, if you understand what a victim goes through, we know, is that true? And the answer is, yell it out. No, you've been sitting here too long. We're apart. This is a group here. The answer is no, of course not. Victims are going to change their stories. And I don't have enough time to go through the myriad of reasons why they do it. But we all know as professionals in the field they do. So my question is right now, first, and we're going to end it with this question, is what am I doing? Ask yourself that. Not only what you're doing in your role, but what are you doing for the people who don't understand what is going on out there with victims? Other people who is going to touch victims' lives. We realize everybody can be a first contact for a victim. The question is, are you holding all your expertise inside when it gets to you, or are you sharing that with people who maybe don't have expertise in that field? What we have seen when you have a comprehensive SART is that you have more reporting, which is great, more prosecution, and we even see longer jail sentences being issued. But the question I have, is it working? The short answer, yes. Is it working enough? The answer is no, it's not working enough. So what can we do? What can we do? My 1 minute time just popped up too. So what can we do? We can learn and we can teach. That is our job. It is our job to be out there and let them know two things. And again, I have to stress this because I believe in this. I see at universities hearings that are going on, counseling and hearings that are going on with people who have no clue how and what a victim goes through, has no clue why an offender does what he does. We need to make sure not only ourselves, but the people out there dealing with victims of sexual violence know what they're doing and understand what a victim goes through. I will tell you, my personal experience is that we are nowhere near where we need to be. I travel the country and I speak about it with Donna. I will say, though, we are much further than we ever were. And I'm proud of that. I'm really, really proud of that. And what I'd like to do is just ask yourself, is the program that you have in place victim-driven? Is it comprehensive? Does it follow state and federal guidelines? And most importantly, especially on a college, in a college atmosphere, if the system fails, and we know the legal system has failed us too many times in the past, and the student drops out of school, do we stop caring for the student at that part? And if we do, what message do we send? That message is, you only count when you come to our school. We have to stop that. If a student has to drop out, we have to continue that care even after they're gone. And if you're not doing it in your school, you need to start doing it. So again, I'm going to ask everybody here and those on the webcast, stand up for a minute. Stand up for the voiceless victims who can't. And ask yourself this. If you were a victim, if your family member was a victim, or if your friend was a victim, you'd be screaming at the top of your lungs for change. I'm asking yourself, why wait? Please let that change happen now. Thank you very much.
Wow, we have received quite a lot of information, and I love hearing from the experts in the field, because I don't know about you, but I got a little Isis. She's 3 years old, and I want the world to be a much better place for her. Our speakers will be available after the program for you to talk with them. I'd now like to bring up Susan Taylor, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of Essence Magazine and founder, National Cares Mentoring Movement. Susan Taylor is synonymous with Essence Magazine, the brand she built as its fashion and beauty editor, and as editor-in-chief, editorial director for 27 years. She authored one of the magazine's most popular columns, In Community Spirit, which I've read from the beginning of time. I now present to you Susan Taylor.
Thank you, Frances Ash Goins. And I have to just say thanks to all of you. The presenters were so very informative. I'm overwhelmed by the information. You heard that I spent 37 of my years at Essence Magazine, 27 leading the publication, and this is so much of what we covered. And when we would open the forums for our readers to speak to us, the sexual violence against women was always really at the top of the feedback that we would get. And a question that I have, though, is it on the increase? You know, was that addressed? Do we think that sexual violence against women and men is on the increase? Men have just become somewhat vocal about it. That is a brand new thing. I'll tell you that we had a television show, the Essence television show, and it was shocking to interview on camera a young male whose grandmother was his abuser, his sexual abuser. And I know that's probably not as shocking to you as it was to us as young editors when that story first came to us. But I think, you know, Frances, just in summation, what I'm asking myself is, what now? What next? I left Essence after 37 years because the village is on fire. That's what's happening in the African American community. And I didn't step away from Essence to do what is already being done. There are so many mentoring organizations, and what we're trying to do with the National Cares Mentoring Movement is recruit the mentors we need for African American young ones, because when the call goes out, it's usually white women who are the first respondents, and then white men, and then black women and black men last. We need mentors in reverse order. There aren't programs that really turn around whole environments, 1,000 children in a school. There are so many, there are hundreds of thousands of them, I'm sure, that really target the 0.01% of the children in the city who need it. I share that with you just to say what I'm feeling in my soul very deeply is that we all have to go back to our respective places of employment or giving to the community and do something different. We can't just take this information. I'm sure this is not the first conference of this kind you've been to. It's overwhelming to have it all put before you in so stunning and stellar and clear a way. What we have to remind ourselves of is this, that there is no problem. There's no social problem that we have that we can't solve. And I thoroughly believe that we're not going to take the critical action that is imperative. It's imperative that we take it until we understand that we hold the reins on our own lives in our hands. What I see is an abdication of authority for our own personal joy and forward movement and creating balance in our lives. So we're overwhelmed. You have to be overwhelmed by this work, like I am by mine. And the negative statistics that I could recount to you that stack up, how about this? Murder, is the number one cause of violence, the number one cause of death, homicide among young black males. And the fact that 86% of young African Americans from 0 up to the 12th grade are performing below standard. Those are daunting statistics, and this is what I'm working on with my team every day. But we have to really do something different. And that something different is really come to this work knowing, with a knowing so deep, and it's been spoken about, that we can solve this. But we have to do something different. And what I see is us speaking to boys and men in a way that maybe we haven't. I don't mean blaming and shouting and, certainly people need to be held accountable for the wounds that they cause others. But I think when girls come out of the womb, we're always being told what not to do sexually. But I don't think those conversations happen early enough or frequently enough with our young men. And I think that they need to happen in churches and mosques and in temples and wherever people are gathered. They need to happen in classrooms. They need to be on television. When I think about what we allow, we cannot have, Essence magazine used to be in Times Square. Time Inc. owns Essence now, and they've moved it a little further uptown to 50-something Street, but Times Square in New York. And if you walk down Times Square right now, and even 10 years ago, what you would see would be poster-sized naked people, advertising underwear and bras and even tires, things that have nothing to do with our bodies. So we live in a society in which women have greatly been devalued, and our bodies have been what? Made public property. So I would bet that a lot of the young men, especially on college campuses, who are abusing women don't even see it that way. Because from the time they were little boys, they've looked up and they've seen, half-naked women or naked women. I was in a cab the other day and ashamed. I said, if I had a little one in here, Francis, I would try to hide that child's eyes because the little screen in the back of the New York City cab was about something that was so inappropriate and an offense to me as a woman, as an adult, I should say, not just a woman, but something so inappropriate for any child to see. So there's a lot of confusion in the world right now, and especially in this nation, about what is appropriate behavior and how women are supposed to be treated. There is hardly a film that you can point to where gratuitous sex and violence are not at the center of it. Because that film, without that, is hardly successful. Whether it's a cartoon, there is violence associated with it, and we have become anesthetized. So what I'm saying is that, I believe in First Amendment rights. I'm a journalist. But I think that we have to stand up because we're sitting down, and we have to shout when we're silent. And we have to say, hell no, not on our watch. We saw those fathers take Abercrombie and Fitch to task for having ads that were inappropriate, half-naked teenagers in a car, riding through a city, having a lot of fun, and a whole campaign that was built around that, and they shut it down. So what I think we need to do is to empower communities to stand up strongly and suggest that certain advertising should never, ever, ever, ever be put before people, because the media speak more loudly than mother and father. The media speak more loudly than any of our voices and our collective voices. So it's really awareness. We need an awareness campaign. In Liberia, let me say in closing, the war in Liberia tore the country apart. It's still healing under President Johnson Sirleaf. And I was asked to get involved and help with the healing of that country. And what I wanted to do was bring advertising agency, specifically Tom Burrell, who built the largest black advertising agency in Chicago. You may know him. And I wanted Tom and his new wife, Madeline, to build a campaign that would put, because the sexual violence, the sexual abuse of girls and women was an act of war, and they were mutilated, so violated. How about speaking to young men and older ones about what pain they cause women? Whoever brings that to them? How about a campaign that brings women to television and boys to television and anybody who's been sexually abused and can communicate powerfully, not anyone, but a real campaign that just helps people, those who have abused, to open their hearts and see, because this is the essential problem in our society. We don't see ourselves in one another. We see others as the other, when, as been stated, and in conclusion, we are each other's keeper. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. And to offend and to destroy and to degrade and just do such damage to the carrier of life, to women and men, we always have to say, is to really destroy ourselves. And so we have to awaken people, because no man or woman wants to be a brute or an abuser. No one wants to be that. So it's our own dysfunction. We have to heal what's hurting us. And hurt people hurt people. I wrote that about 30 years ago and it's gone viral. But hurt people hurt people. So we have to help people heal, because we bring our pain with us wherever we go, to college campuses, to church, to work. Healing is really what we're talking about here today. And I just say, go back and think critically about your work, and let's do something that we've never done before, because we can, in our lifetime, in the now time, end violence against girls and women and boys and men. This is our task. This is why we're here, and it's doable. I thank you, Frances.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. That's the message. We can make a difference. We can make this happen. I thank all of you for participating today, and I have a special surprise. So, under the certain seats in the audience, on the left-hand side, there is a number. And if you're that lucky person with that number, you will have be presented with a book that was done by Susan Taylor, and she will be over on this corner, and she will sign those books for you, for all the lucky ones that are sitting in chairs. All righty, somebody got one. Yay, I know they're there someplace. Great. I would also like to thank our planning committee members, which are on the program, and thank you to our wonderful exhibitors, and thank you to our wonderful volunteers. The program is over. However, I'd like to show Susan Taylor's Mentoring Cares video right now, and you can watch this as you're visiting the exhibit tables and you're doing all that you're doing. Thanks so very much. I appreciate you. Amen. Amen. It's done.
Okay. These are the facts. One third of all black children
are living in poverty.
Living in poverty.
These are the facts.
These are the facts.
6.6% of all African American births
are to mothers under the age of 18.
The infant mortality rate for black babies is more than twice that of the national average and rising.
These are the facts.
The vast majority of schools in New Orleans are still closed.
Still closed.
Every day
in
America, more than 1,000 black children are arrested.
1 in every 8 black men aged 25 to 29.
25 to 29 is incarcerated.
For young black women, aged 25 to 34.
HIV/AIDS is the leading cause of death.
The leading cause of death.
And the leading cause of death for our boys.
For our young black men, it's homicide.
But these are also the facts. From the hundreds of rebellions that took place on slave ships, to the students who sat in Greensboro, and the students who walked out in Soweto. We have always fought back, always cared for our own, always resisted injustice. We are the people who refuse to die. Today, the urgent need is to reverse the deadly trends destroying the lives of so many of our young people. We believe we all have a responsibility to answer our children's cry for help. So we launched Essence Cares to offer media support to the National Cares Mentoring Movement. Leading this critical effort with me are my co-chair, Tommy Dortch, Chairman Emeritus of the National 100 Black Men of America, and a coalition of leaders of some of the most trusted organizations in the nation, including the National 100 Black Men of America, the National Urban League, the Links Incorporated, and the YWCA. These organizations are in the vanguard. Others are committed as well. This is what this critical call to commitment is asking of you, that you become a mentor. Put a guiding hand on a vulnerable young person's shoulder, or join with friends and mentor a group of at-risk youngsters. Work with the National Cares Mentoring Movement on recruiting mentors for the children that are struggling in your area. Help build and sustain this crucial effort by making a donation to the National Cares Mentoring Movement. No amount is too small.
You can mentor.
You can mentor one of the 2.4 million children.
2.4
million.
Almost 2.5 million children.
Who has a parent in prison.
You can get five
friends.
5 friends to register.
To register and vote.
Failing schools, the carnage in our communities, celebration of thug life, the over-incarceration and relentless demonization of black males, the demeaning of black women. No, not on our watch.
You can demand your church.
You can demand your church.
You can demand your church be open for children after school and on Saturdays.
In order to teach our kids an accurate account of their history.
That our churches can create the
communities our children are longing for.
Won't you join in and help recruit the people you work and worship with and your family and friends as mentors? We've lived through harder and harsher times than these. Like then, the most revolutionary thing we can do right now is to love one another. Help to secure the most vulnerable among us, our children, our beloved children.
So I'm in.
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 Are you?
Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Alpha Phi Alpha, the National Institute for Literacy, Girl Scouts USA, Mad Dads, National CASA, Operation Hope, the Children's Defense Fund, United Negro College Fund, Omega Psi Phi, National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, National Black College Alumni Hall of Fame Foundation, U.S. Dream Academy, National Council of Negro Women, Sigma Pi Phi, National Black MBA Association, National Coalition of 100 Black Women, 21st Century Foundation, Mentoring USA, National Organization of Concerned Black Men, the National Mentoring Partnership, the National Cares Mentoring Movement. Log on to caresmentoring.com, enter your zip code, and get connected to a mentoring organization or join a care circle in your community.